of course, if you're here, you probably know what's going on. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has published a letter, a statement, effectively declaring trans affirmative healthcare child abuse, effectively trying to argue that trans youth is illegal in Texas. And this has just kind of had a ripple effect. There's a lot of bad science, not so much in like the Greg Abbott letter, which is actually very short, but Greg Abbott is building off of someone else by the name of Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton is the absolute bastard who is just citing so much bullcrap that we just got to go through. But first, let's just read through Greg Abbott's letter, and if you'd like to take that away.
Okay. So Greg Abbott, Texas Governor. Dear Commissioner Masters, consistent with our correspondence in August 2021, the Office of the Attorney General, in brackets OAG, has now confirmed in the enclosed opinion that a number of so-called sex change procedures constitute child abuse under existing Texas law. Because the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services, in brackets DFPS, is responsible for protecting children from abuse, I hereby direct your agency to conduct a prompt and thorough investigation of any reported instances of these abusive procedures in the state of Texas. As OAG opinion number KB0401 makes clear, it is already against the law to subject Texas children to a wide variety of elective procedures for gender transitioning, including reassignment surgeries that can cause sterilization, mastectomies, removals of otherwise healthy body parts, and administration of puberty-blocking drugs or supraphysiologic doses of testosterone or estrogen. Texas law imposes reporting requirements upon all licensed professionals who have direct contact with children who may be subject to such abuse, including doctors, nurses, and teachers, and provides criminal penalties for failure to report such child abuse. There are similar reporting requirements and criminal penalties for members of the general public. Texas law also imposes a duty on DFPS to investigate the parents of a child who is subjected to these abusive gender transitioning procedures, and on other state agencies to investigate licensed facilities where such procedures may occur. To protect Texas children from abuse, DFPS and all other state agencies must follow the law as explained in OAG opinion number KB0401.
Okay, and we'll get to unpacking that in a second, but first we received a $10 donation from Eva Stones. Quote, I've never been able to catch live shows. Let's make the most of it with a super chat. Thank you. Again, it all goes to putting food on the table and keeping everything running. I'm trying a new thing with my agenda here. I've actually got the tick thing here, so I can hopefully keep track better of what I've already gone over. And let's just start with the basic point here, which is this letter is effectively trying to argue that trans youth as a whole are illegal. And it does various things here in conflation, and we'll go on to unpack that all in a bit, but that is the basis here. It's trying to make being trans or being a trans youth in Texas illegal. Now, this of course has resulted in international outcry. People all over are just condemning the horrific bill. Institutions, organizations, LGBT plus rights groups, they've all just come out in condemnation of this horrific attack on one of the most vulnerable groups out there. It's really, it really is showing us the state of discourse surrounding trans people in places like the US and the UK. And it really shows just how dire things are for so many people. One of the things that has kind of resulted from this is a lot of Texas families with, trans youth or just, gender non-conforming youth even, are talking about leaving the state. That is how bad things are, It really is an absolute mess, and as you get people like talking about, hey, we're going to move out sort of thing, there's also a lot of people who are like, we don't have the funds, we don't have the resources, we don't have the social structure in place to do this, especially, Black trans people, native trans people, they don't have that option there, a lot of them. So there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of tension, and generally it just kind of feels almost apocalyptic. And I know there's also a lot of other stuff going on in other parts of the world right now, not just in the US with like Florida and the Don't Say Gay bill, but also in Ukraine, what's happening in Europe. So like, again, it does kind of almost feel like an omen of the end days at this point, with just how much shit is really going on. So the first thing, sorry, there's actually one more point that I did want to talk about here. And that's the fact that this has resulted in a discussion about whether what is occurring constitutes as genocide. And in that vein, I've actually gone ahead and I've got the definition of genocide as offered by the United Nations. And there's two elements to this definition of genocide. The first is a mental element, and that is the intent to destroy in whole or in part a nation, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And then you've got the second element, which is a physical element, which includes the following 5 acts enumerated exhaustively. So, killing members of a group, pretty simple one. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And there are a number of these that are very easy to kind of equate to the situation, particularly that last one, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Because what effectively is attempting to be done here by equating trans affirmation with child abuse is that will allow, child protective services acting in an absolute heinous way to come in, seize children out of these affirming households which are doing everything in their power to give these children their best chance at a future, and put them inside families which do not have that desire, that will torture them, that will abuse them, that will neglect them. And, that is a big part of this. There's also, of course, the inflicting of psychological harm. You can just see how bad things are when you have an entire demographic effectively saying, we want to get out of here. Many of us can't, but we still want to get out of here. That shows you just how bad things are. That is harm. That is terror. That's the only word that really talks about it, right? Terror. That is what's currently going on right now. And the thing is, this may not be direct, concentration camps or anything like that, but it is deliberately inflicting conditions that are calculated to bring about the physical destruction of the group as a whole. The calculated idea here on part of people like Greg Abbott is, if we can destroy trans youth, then at least we can destroy a large majority of trans adults. Of course, we know it doesn't exactly work that way with closeted and hiding who you are until you can get out and get away from that. But that's their reasoning here. That's why they are putting so much into attacking trans youth. So the physical elements, we tick multiple ones there. As for the mental elements, the intent to destroy, we'll come back to this later. I think towards the end I'm actually going to discuss in regards to one of the reasons why this is being done. The fact that this always seems to be brought about as a retaliatory attempt against, last year, where Texas Republicans attempted to pass a bill criminalizing trans healthcare. That bill failed. That meant not even enough Republicans supported this horrific idea, trying to effectively destroy trans healthcare for everybody. So it seems that, okay, we failed to get on the legislative front, so we're just going to come out and do this letter. Because the thing is, this letter is not legal yet. And that is one of the biggest qualifiers I have to put on this. Okay, this is not code of law yet. This is not part of like legal precedent or anything like that. This is simply a stated opinion. Until it's gone through court and a judge has ruled one way or another, it is currently not the law. And we'll also get to what social work unions are saying in Texas, and it's a lot better than I think many of us would have hoped. That's not to say you can just like breathe a sigh of relief and go away. I'm just saying, take that fear, that desperation, that like crippling almost doubt of like it's too late now. Take that, hone it, turn it into a weapon to fight this, okay? There needs to be a lot of steps done. We will give you some basic ways that you can get involved, how you can support people on the ground if you're not local, whatever. And if you are local, you know, a couple of protests that you can get involved in. We will give you some ways that you can get involved with direct action. This is not the end. This is merely the start, okay? This is not the time to lose our head and just kind of, you know, oh, we can't do anything right now. This is the moment you need to stand firm. This is the moment you need to have your voice heard, really. I believe we got a super chat. I've just got to tick these off and I will go and check that. We received a $10 super chat from Caden Pat. Quote, "It's scary that this may be upheld by our Supreme Court and then spread to other red states." End quote. Yeah, that is a terrifying element. Like, it can. Like, I'm not trying to say, oh, it's all okay or anything like that. If this continues to get worse, then it will impact other areas. It's like what I've talked about, the fact that Jeff Damon Younger is currently running for office in Texas House District 63, I believe. The Republican primaries haven't even happened yet, so whether he'll even be the Republican candidate is not, you know, known yet. But it's very possible that he will become, you know, a local politician, and that will bolster the narrative he's created. We'll talk more about that in a bit, because that and Munchausen's by proxy comes up, as it always does. So, you know, there's just a lot going on here. Don't abandon hope. Get mad and use that anger. So, one thing that we saw there with the letter is repeated mention of, I think it was number KP0401. KP in this refers to Ken Paxton, who, as Mallory rightfully pointed out, is the Texas Attorney General. So we'll just start reading that letter if you want to read the first part, dear.
Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General. Dear Representative Matt Krause, you ask whether the performance of certain medical and chemical procedures on children, several of which have the effect of sterilization, constitute child abuse. This is number one. Number one, you specifically ask about procedures falling under the broader category of gender reassignment surgeries. Request letter at 1. You state that such procedures typically are performed to transition individuals with gender dysphoria to their desired gender, and you identify the following specific sex change procedures. Number 1, sterilization through castration, vasectomy, hysterectomy, oophorectomy, metoidioplasty, orchiectomy, penectomy, phalloplasty, and vaginoplasty. Number 2, mastectomies. And number 3, removing from children otherwise healthy or non-diseased body part or tissue. Additionally, you ask whether providing, administering, prescribing, or dispensing drugs to children that induce transient or permanent infertility constitutes child abuse. CID at 1 to 2. You include the following categories of drugs. Number 1, puberty suppression or puberty blocking drugs. Number 2, supraphysiologic doses of testosterone to females. And number 3, supraphysiologic doses of estrogen to males.
Sorry about that. We received another donation, a 50 DKK, I believe that is Danish krona? I do not know. From Moif Felicita. Quote, stay safe everyone, love from Denmark. Of course it's from Denmark, so yes, it will be Danish kroner. Thank you very much for that donation, it is greatly appreciated. As mentioned at the chat, we will be coming to the potential wide world effects of what's happening in Texas with relation to Tavistock, because it kind of has this domino effect that goes on, an actual slippery slope that can be demonstrated to work, unlike usual slippery slopes here. I also just wanted to pause to quickly state that if you are a trans person and watching this, and at any point you feel like this is becoming too much, please do step away, step out. You know, you don't have to get involved like at harm to your own health. Please do not do that. This is not the time for that. You know, take care of yourself first and foremost. If you're cis, stay. We need your help on this. And it's kind of like cis people are doing this, so we need you to step up and be the good cis people.
I'm sorry.
Something for you to be sorry about. Like, my wife is here reading out stuff to help us, so you know. But yes, anyway, I need to get my points open. So let's unpack the facts that, as mentioned, this letter didn't come out of nowhere. It came as a response to Matt Krause, who, as someone in October of 2021 began harassing Texas school boards, asking them whether a list of 850 books on the subjects of race and sexuality were in Texas libraries and classrooms. Of course, a lot of this, especially relating to the whole racial aspect, was about the whole hysteria that's being constructed about critical race theory, or, as people who actually know what they're talking about prefer to say, history. You know, so quite clearly Matt Krause is someone who's just going out to stir shit, to hurt marginalized people, and that's what has led Ken Paxton to reply with this. Now, the first thing that also comes to mind here is the fact that we're not even talking about medical transition when it comes to trans youth. We're talking about social transition. This conversation is just foundationally based on such a dishonest portrayal of what trans youth actually go through, that it's amazing that you know, Greg Abbott even thought to post this. But that's the thing, most people, due to the abysmal state of, you know, gender and relationship sexual education, people are not going to know about this. They're not going to know the facts that trans youth don't receive medical transition. The only time, you know, young children are going to receive any sort of medical transition is puberty blockers once they hit puberty, and they are fully reversible with no known adverse side effects. They were medications first developed for early onset, also known as precocious puberty. They went through pharmaceutical testing, and they are completely safe as far as medications can be. That's always an important qualifier. Some brilliant people then realized, hang on a second, we could also use these things, which we use for much younger cis children, to help trans children when they're a little older. The only time an extremely young, you know, trans child is ever going to be given puberty blockers, usually the age is about 12 when they're starting on puberty blockers at the earliest. The only time a trans child would ever be given puberty blockers earlier than that is if they themselves have precocious puberty. And the way we deal with precocious puberty, which results in acute psychological distress, not physiological actually. You know, early onset puberty doesn't cause so much physiological problems, but psychological problems of just going through puberty so many years before everyone else. The way we dealt with it was through puberty blockers. So that's the only reason they'd ever be given them, so if they needed them anyway. It's interesting how puberty blockers are demonized only when they are given to trans children. As for social transition, it is vital to trans youth. It is part of the affirmation model. The only sort of other approaches are to just refuse listening to the child. You know, that's what the whole sit and wait is, you know, just refuse listening to them, which is a form of rejection when someone is trying to talk to you about an aspect that is vital to their identity. Or there's, of course, reparative torture, which is the active and mechanical attempt to change a person's gender or sexuality. Now, I do actually have to include a content warning, because I actually forgot to include this at the start. Content warning: attempted suicide. I'm just going to give you about 10 seconds to step out if that is something that's going to impact you. I will also add that to the content warning at the top. I need to add that later, but yes, I do need to talk about attempted suicide here. I forgot to add that at the beginning. I really do apologize. So the base level for attempted suicide in the LGBT plus community is around 8%. Attempts to convince an LGBT plus person to change their gender or sexuality increases that to 23%. That is just attempts to try and talk them into changing. Actual reparative torture, focused specifically at trans youth in this case, so not the LGBT plus community as a whole, increases attempted suicide to 53%. This comes from the Trevor Project, specifically the Trevor National Survey on LGBTQ youth and mental health. That was published in 2019. So again, social transition is a vital aspect of ensuring a trans child's well-being. Okay, I'm just having a quick look at the chat. Late response, the letter may not have teeth, but it carries so much visceral hatred, it's screaming stamp him out. Yes, we will get round to that. We'll also get round to citizen policing and the reliance on citizen policing. Anyway, what's also really interesting is the fact that a number of the procedures do not sterilize. Mesioidplasty and phalloplasty, so that's the construction of either the meta and neophallus. What's the difference, you might ask? Well, a mesioidplasty relies on enlarging the clitoris and working from there, whilst the phalloplasty relies on constructing, I believe, is a phallus on the arm from other tissue. So, you know, neither of those processes result in sterilization. You have to go through other medical procedures in order to do that. So it's really interesting how they're listed when they have absolutely nothing to do with fertility. It really just shows just how, underwhelming the understanding of these procedures are. But that's not exactly surprising.
Ignorant.
Ignorance, that's the word, thank you. How ignorant the understanding is, or lack of understanding is. What's also interesting to note here is it talks about the permanent infertility, but it also talks about transient infertility in children, i.e. temporary infertility in children. And, you know, that kind of relates to the whole way that fascism sexualizes minors as breeding and sexual stock. Now, why do I distinguish between breeding and sexual stock? Because, well, there's two things that are kind of going on here. On one hand, we have the way that fascism presents, and I'm going to say this, people assigned female at birth, presents them as, you know, sexual livestock designed to bear the next generation of white civilization, as it always focuses on, because fascism in the West is very closely linked to white nationalism. It's kind of this whole, you know, mothers need to have babies, and of course, they don't see trans men, they see cis girls, which are being taken away from them, decreasing that breeding stock, and thus weakening Western civilization, or specifically Western white civilization. There's also, however, sexual stock, and this is something else that the quote just read out talks about, because it's not just about sterilization, it also mentions mastectomies. And this is when you get to the facts that fascism as a horrific ideology likes to offer its members its heroes in battle, if you will, and they absolutely delude themselves into believing that they are heroes in this instance, that, you know, for your service, for your work, etc., you will be handed a sexual partner, you know, a woman, and I'm putting that in air quotes because that's how they perceive a woman, you know, they'll be handed a woman, or in this case, a young child who will sate those expectations. Because there is no reason to be talking about a child's ability to, you know, reproduce and, you know, mammary tissue, etc. They should not be having children, but it is part of the fascist ideology that people like Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton are pushing. If you'd like to see more about that, I also have a video I recently did on Jill Bear, which talks about the UK TERF movement and how it is entirely fascist. That is linked in the the agenda. You can go check that out. That will give you more details about what I'm talking about. I also use more salient examples from the UK, including how in the UK we have barristers talking about up and down the UK, there are young girls who are removing healthy breasts that have never known a lover's caress, I believe is the terminology. And this is a barrister talking about this sort of stuff. You know, this sexualization of minors is not a bug of fascism. It's a feature. It is part of their ideology. Okay, so I believe that takes us to the next section, which if you could possibly read.
This is the continuation of the Ken
Yes,
Paxton
this is,
letter.
all of these, except for the ones that are further indented, are, Ken Paxton.
You qualify your question with the following statement. Some children have a medically verifiable genetic disorder of sex development or do not have the normal sex chromosome structure for male or female as determined by a physician through genetic testing that require procedures similar to those described in this request. In other words, in rare circumstances, some of the procedures you list are born out of medical necessity. For example, a minor male with testicular cancer may need an orchiectomy. This opinion does not address or apply to medically necessary procedures.
So what I want to highlight here is the section that states, quote, or do not have the normal sex chromosome structure for male or female as determined by a physician through genetic testing that require procedures similar to those described in this request. What this is effectively telling us is that any time an intersex person has differences in chromosomes, they should be their body should be forced physically through infant mutilation to meet with society's predetermined idea of what boy and girl is. And it is absolutely horrific when the fact is that there is no justification for this. It's worth noting that 3 former US Surgeon Generals wrote about this in 2017, stating the following, or should I say, Human Rights Watch covered the facts that 3 US Surgeon Generals wrote about this, stating that, quote, in July 2017, 3 former US Surgeon Generals wrote that they believed, quote, there is insufficient evidence that growing up with atypical genitalia leads to psychosocial distress, end quote, while there is little evidence that cosmetic infant genitoplasty is necessary to reduce psychological damage, evidence does not show that the surgery itself can cause severe and evidence does show that the surgery itself can cause severe and irreversible physical harm and emotional distress, end quote. They said, quote, these surgeries violate an individual's right to personal autonomy over their own future, end quote. The 3 doctors concluded, quote, babies are being born who rely on adults to make decisions in their best interest, and this should mean one thing. When an individual is born with atypical genitalia that pose no physical risk, treatment should focus not on surgical intervention, but on psychosocial and educational support for the family and the child, end quote, so double end quote. So again, there's just absolutely no justification for, intersex genital mutilation, unless there is a other issue that is not necessarily related to the child being intersex, such as a blocked urinary tract. They do not require any form of surgery. So the fact that this letter is talking about chromosomes, so a child's chromosomes might lead them to require, genital intervention or genital mutilation, is just really heinous and shows the double fucking standard on display here. I've also got a quote here from the United Nations which explains the myriad of issues related to intersex genital mutilation. Said mutilation results in, quote, infertility, pain, incontinence, loss of sexual sensation, and lifelong mental suffering, including depression, end quote. So this is fine. This is what, Greg Abbott is absolutely fine with, but actually helping, a teenager, first of all, just pause puberty until they become an adult in many parts of the world, because like in the UK, the age of full medical consent across the board is 16. To reach that age where they can make an informed choice, that's bad. That's bad. And it really just shows how, like, the claims of won't someone think of the children, they're just absolutely vile, absurd, and nonsensical in every single way imaginable. And it's also worth pointing out the facts that whilst, Greg Abbott is targeting trans people here, he is also throwing intersex infants under the bus at the same time. He is using them, he is being very clear that, yes, we can still torture these intersex children, these intersex infants, so they need to be part of this conversation as well. Like, do listen to what the intersex community is saying at the moment too. It's not a case of trans people are the only people being targeted here. Intersex people are also being targeted here. General people are going to see this, going to read parts of this, and going to think, oh, so okay, the whole, intersex thing, medically intervening and that's justified, when it's absolutely not. There is no grounds for justifying intersex genital mutilation. Okay, moving on, we have this quote. Yeah.
And this is...
This is, again, going back to Ken Paxton, I should say.
This is the continuation of the same letter, the Ken Paxton letter. Executive summary. Based on the analysis herein, each of the sex change procedures and treatments enumerated above, when performed on children, can legally constitute child abuse under several provisions of Chapter 261 of the Texas Family Code. Number 1, these procedures and treatments can cause mental or emotional injury to a child that results in an observable and material impairment in the child's growth, development, or psychological functioning. Number 2, these procedures and treatments can cause or permit the child to be in a situation in which the child sustains a mental or emotional injury that results in an observable or material impairment in the child's growth, development, or psychological functioning. Number 3, these procedures and treatments can cause a physical injury that results in substantial harm to the child. And number 4, these procedures and treatments often involve a failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent an action by another person that results in physical injury that results in substantial harm to the child, particularly by parents, counselors, and physicians. In addition to analysis under the Family Code, we discuss below the fundamental right to procreation, issues of physical and emotional harm associated with these procedures and treatments, consent laws in Texas and throughout the country, and existing child abuse standards. Each of the procedures and treatments you ask about can constitute child abuse when performed on minor children. I hope my reading is okay.
You're doing very well compared to how I usually do. People have lived through me.
No, it's just my pronunciation of certain words.
Not an issue, hon. I just quickly wanted to go through all of these and point out how the fact that every single one of these meets reparative torture. If Greg Abbott actually wanted to do something to help the children, and Ken Paxton wanted to talk about that as well, they could try to end reparative torture. Not all of it does rely on physical injury, though a substantial part, especially in parts like Texas, certainly do. Caning, forcing children to put their hands down toilets, electrocution, these sorts of things. Reparative torture meets all of these. But when it comes to it, absolute silence. Only when they can kind of warp it to such a degree, claim that trans youth are going through procedures they're just not, frankly, it's just a straight up lie, only then do they suddenly care about it. And I just kind of wanted to unpack that. So that's quite a short one. If you could continue. Again, it's Ken Paxton continued.
The novel trend of providing these elective sex changes to minors often has the effect of permanently sterilizing those minor children. While you refer to these procedures as sex changes, it is important to note that it remains medically impossible to truly change the sex of an individual because this is determined biologically at conception. No doctor can replace a fully functioning male sex organ with a fully functioning female sex organ, or vice versa. In reality, these sex change procedures seek to destroy a fully functioning sex organ in order to cosmetologically create the illusion of a sex change.
Which, bringing things back round to the whole chromosomal argument, if a child is outwardly appearing, as what is typically assigned, male or female, and yet their chromosomes differ, apparently, the surgeon's supposed to go in, destroy the genitals, and redesign them in line with said chromosomes. And apparently they have the magic to do that, but at the same time, here Ken Paxton is arguing, I know, trans people, the genitals are nothing like the real thing, sort of thing. And again, we just see this hypocrisy when it comes to intersex infants at the expense of intersex infants. Again, the issue here is the fact that no trans children are receiving, genital surgery. So it's just a non-issue. That's not to say this issue will be unimportant if it were occurring, because, fun fact, it is occurring and it is being done to intersex infants. There is a fight to be had here. They're just focusing on the wrong people. If this was a bill or like a letter that came out attacking, the mutilation of intersex children, we'd be supporting that. We'd be behind that because that is a horrific practice that actually exists, actually hurts people, but we're not. We're chasing an invisible dragon of, trans children who are being forced to undergo full-on surgery, which again just doesn't happen. So, I just kind of really... It just irks me the way that everything Greg Abbott is saying here, makes sense when it comes to intersex children. But when it comes to trans youth, it just goes out the window. Sense is not a word that exists here. Sorry, continued again.
So,
again,
Same letter,
Ken Paxton.
While the spike in these procedures is a relatively recent development, sterilization of minors and other vulnerable populations without clear consent is not a new phenomenon and has an unsettling history. Historically weaponized against minorities, sterilization procedures have harmed many vulnerable populations, such as African Americans, female minors, the disabled, and others. These violations have been found to infringe upon the fundamental human right to procreate. Any discussion on sterilization procedures in the context of minor children must, accordingly, consider the fundamental right that is at stake, the right to procreate. Given the uniquely vulnerable nature of children and the clear dangers of sterilization demonstrated throughout history, it is important to emphasize the crux of the question you present today: whether facilitating parents or counselors are conducting, through doctors, medical procedures and treatments that could permanently deprive minor children of their constitutional right to procreate or impair their ability to procreate before those children have the legal capacity to consent to those procedures and treatments constitutes child abuse.
We'll get to that in a second, but I just want to do a bit more of a lighter. I noticed a comment by Generalize, which states, quote, "fundamental right to procreation," end quote. Wow, how about the right to abstain from procreation? And the whole thing, I guess it's the Texan way. And Generalize, much love to you all near and far. Thank you, that is greatly appreciated.
Also, thank you to Brand.
Brand,
for reassuring that I'm reading okay.
Yeah, you are. But yeah, it is just the whole Texan, the Republican Texan hypocrisy, this idea of a person's worth is only boiled down to their ability to procreate. Here we actually see a conflation with genocide, which is extremely ironic considering what's actually being done here. Because whilst, Ken Paxton might not say the G word, the way that they're talking about, marginalized groups being sterilized against their will, that's very clearly trying to tap into... I do apologize for the car. I do not know what's happening.
That's a car or a train?
That was a car. That wasn't a train. Anyway, it's very clearly attempting to tap into this idea of like the horrors of colonialism and the sterilization of black people and native people in, the Americas, etc., which are horrific things. And let's be honest, the Texan Republican Party would absolutely be on board with. But, it's trying to it's trying to capitalize on that to pretend like that's the issue at all with trans youth, and it's just absolutely fucking not. That's why I actually went through the definition of genocide and explained how various points actually relate to genocide, where this just doesn't. Because again, children are not going for medical transitioning. There are, as we'll come to see later, key differences between trans youth and simply gender non-conforming youth exploring who they are. Differences so clear that the people who go on to receive further support and later puberty blockers, 100% of them went on to receive HRT. And the reason that is because they didn't regret it. 100% of them. No regret as far as we know. There's clear differences between trans youth and non-trans youth. Also the fact that a lot of trans people aren't sterilized. A lot of trans people don't feel the need to go through procedures that would sterilize them. I've had trans men tell me that, hey, we're told by our doctors the fact that testosterone therapy is not an effective means of birth control. You still have to be aware of these things because it's kind of important, As for trans women, whilst it usually does result in temporary infertility, if you actually come off them for a while, a lot of trans women will actually be able to. Of course, things change when you go through a gonadectomy. However, a lot of trans people aren't being sterilized, and that's actually how the trans community is growing right now. It's growing to become more accepting of the facts that you don't have to go through a gonadectomy to be trans. There's no gatekeeping. There's no true transness that you obtain through going through a gonadectomy. And that's a change we're, moving towards. And this is at complete odds of that, What's important is to... Levi. Ethel means me, I'm trans men. Anyway, it's at complete odds with what is actually going on. Because what trans youth need right now is support in who they are. And they need support that lets them know, hey, when you grow up, you're going to have the ability to transition, but just because you're trans, you don't have to transition in certain ways. You can just have HRT, you can just get certain forms of elective surgery. You don't have, there's no whole package, there's no completeness in becoming trans, there's no universal trans experience. That's what trans youth need right now, and yeah, of course, it's Greg Abbott and his fucking... I was going to say Lex Luthor there for a second, but it's not. It's Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton just doesn't give a shit about reality. Of course, another thing here to note is the fact that the trans people are marginalized. There's something especially heinous about the idea of, people, especially marginalized people, being sterilized. It's like, we are, the marginalized. Could you fucking listen to us? We're the ones in the firing line right now, and of course that's not what he's actually doing. He's just trying to exploit kind of the facade. It's a whole facade. It's just cladding being put over the face of the whole thing. It's just a fucking propaganda piece designed to make it look like he's actually doing something when he's fucking not. I also just wanted to take note of the whole idea of this being a recent development and, quote, a novel idea, end quote. This is just so fucking detached, in every single way. Again, trans youth is not being medically transitioned, but the idea of trans people being medically transitioned, this has been going on not for decades, not for centuries, but millennia. We have archaeological artifacts that were used to perform early forms of trans surgery. And our methods have gone through leaps and bounds, since the start of the previous century. So it really is so fucking annoying for him to it's a novelty, it's new. No, it's not new. It's just most people are only hearing about it for the first time. We'll come back to this towards the end, as I'll go on to give a basic explanation of the trans hysteria and why we see what we see today. But yes, I just kind of wanted to call that out. Next quote, please. Continuing on from the Ken Paxton letter.
The medical evidence does not demonstrate that children and adolescents benefit from engaging in these irreversible sterilization procedures. The prevalence of gender dysphoria in children and adolescents has never been estimated, and there is no scientific consensus that these sterilizing procedures and treatments even serve to benefit minor children dealing with gender dysphoria. As stated by the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, is it Medicaid? Yeah. Medicaid Services, there is not enough high-quality evidence to determine whether gender reassignment surgery improves health outcomes for Medicare beneficiaries with gender dysphoria and whether patients most likely to benefit from these types of surgical intervention can be identified prospectively.
And there's also a little quote just a little bit later on, which I'll just talk at once because it comes back to Centers of Medicare.
The lack of evidence in this field is why the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services rejected a nationwide coverage mandate for adult gender transition surgeries during the Obama administration.
I am so tempted to say thanks, Obama. I just, no. But anyway, just as a joke. But anyway, first of all, the reason that there are no studies demonstrating why medical transition is beneficial or not beneficial for trans youth is pretty simple. Trans youth is not being medically transitioned. That's the first thing. The second thing here is the dishonesty going on here, where it talks about the facts that, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid rejected a nationwide coverage mandate for adult gender transition under the Obama administration. You get the sense that, hey, adults mean 18 upwards, right? What Ken Paxton's left out is this quote is strictly about discussion on gender transition for people over 65. Pensioners. That's what this quote is actually on about. But it's being presented as, hey, 18 and up, there's no evidence that this helps. That is fundamentally bullshit, and they fucking know it's bullshit. That's why they've had to go all the way into the bin to find a quote about when person meets 65, is it really beneficial? I say if a person wants to go for it, they should have every fucking right to get it. Does not matter the age, especially in the cultures we've lived through, It wasn't possible to transition for many people in earlier generations. It's not a case of, their weakness, they just didn't know, their insecurity or whatever. It's the fact that they had to protect themselves, and they should have the right to transition and live the rest of their lives as best as they can. And this is where we get to the idea of, insurance, and I know Medicare and Medicaid is a bit different, but insurance companies and is trans healthcare technically covered as an essential healthcare? For those who don't know, Janice Raymond is kind of the progenitor of a lot of the modern TERF rhetoric, and we will come to more of that in a second. She was hired by the US government to produce a paper titled Technology on the Social and Ethical Aspects of Transsexual Surgery, which she just came out condemning it in the 80s. And that was used to justify removing trans healthcare for prisoners, which insurance companies at the time used as justification to then remove trans healthcare from essential care. Since prisoners have human rights, they need to have access to essential care. The US government has decided trans surgery is not essential care. Therefore, how can they hold us, the insurance companies, to fork out money for trans surgery? What this leaves out, however, is the fact that Janice Raymond was not a neutral participant. She was someone with a personal political agenda against trans women. This is what she had to state in regards to trans women specifically. Quote, all transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves. Transsexuals merely cut off the most obvious means of invading women so that they seem non-invasive, end quote. This, of course, came from Janice Raymond's magnum opus, The Transsexual Empire, The Creation of the She-Male, a book she published before the US government then approached her. And I've read her paper. It is garbage. There is absolutely no science in it. It is just a repetition of her opinion and the opinions of people like her. So yeah, it's kind of unsurprising. It's also worth noting that there's the following quote in The Transsexual Empire, The Creation of the She-Male. I sadly was unable to find this page number. My copy is back in the UK because, yes, I bought a copy that was going to be destroyed from a Canadian library of all places. Just to kind of like know your enemy to know thyself sort of thing. But thankfully someone had posted this online with a screenshot, so I've gone ahead and quoted it here. Quote, I have argued that the issue of transsexualism is an ethical issue that has profound political and moral ramifications. Transsexualism itself is a deeply moral question rather than a medical technical answer. I contend that the problem of transsexualism would best be served by morally mandating it out of existence. End quote. This is the person the US government chose to approach about helping them form early policies in regards to trans prisoners. Surprisingly, she's fucking hostile to trans people and came against it. Now, the impact of this is still felt today in the fact that many insurance companies no longer hold trans healthcare to be essential care and thus can deny your claim on that basis. Before her paper, it was essential care in the US. Insurance companies used to be better in the US than they are now in regards to trans healthcare. They used to have to pay for it. They don't anymore. And with Medicare and, you know, all that coming along, that has largely, sadly, it's not like a national health service and everything in the UK. You know, it's sadly kind of taken the insurance stuff and like subsidized it and made it a little bit more accessible, but it's still largely based on the ideas set by the insurance companies, which is why, yes, like there's this whole debate, whereas before there wasn't. And no one wants to seem to deal with the origins of this horrific state. So yeah, that's kind of an important aspect to point out. Yes, so if we could continue with the next Paxton quote.
Also, several studies show a higher rate of regret at being sterilized among younger women than among those who were sterilized at a later age. This further indicates that minor children are not sufficiently mature to make informed decisions in this context.
And this is where the argument about abortion access comes in, because this whole sterilization is relating to, you know, whether women should be allowed to undergo, you know, tubal litigation. Ligation, not litigation.
Ligation.
Sorry, ligation, yeah. Where they should be undergo tubal ligation. The paper is Sequelae of Tubal Ligation, Medical and Psychological, which was published in the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology by an author Moore. I was able to find it was a discussion, I believe, I don't know if it was a court discussion or something else. I was able to find the conversation where it was referenced, but the reference that was given was so broken that I was unable to track down the original paper and thus cannot really give any sort of like discussion about it. All I do know is it came from 1978, and it's interesting that they're using one reference from this long ago, because like society has changed significantly. You know, women suffer internalized misogyny, you know, even if, and the whole thing of like their family around them. If you talk to a trans person who transition, the transition can be the greatest thing ever, but your family can make you feel so shit about it that you regret it. Same thing can happen with abortion and things like tubal ligation. So, you know, a lot of stuff has moved on. They're still using a study from 1978 and nothing more recent, And again, that suggests to me that this is most likely bullshit. So yes, next quote on the Paxton letter. We're actually making good progress. Thank you so much for reading out everything, dear.
There is no evidence that long-term mental health outcomes are improved or that rates of suicide are reduced by hormonal or surgical intervention. Childhood onset gender dysphoria has been shown to have a high rate of natural resolution, with 61 to 98% of children re-identifying with their biological sex during puberty. No studies to date have evaluated the natural course and rate of gender dysphoria resolution among the novel cohort presenting with adolescent onset gender dysphoria.
Okay. Now, the first thing I want to note about this is the fact that this comes from the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, which, if you've been playing this game for long enough, and I shouldn't really refer to it as game.
I'll just get tea.
Yep, get tea. If you've been around this circle for long enough, you probably recognize this immediately for what it is. It's a pseudoscientific institution attempting to dress itself up as something it isn't. We saw the same thing happen when marriage equality was really the topic of contention. You know, the Academy of Pediatrics came out in support of marriage equality, so a bunch of its members ran away and they created the College of Pediatricians to try and capitalize off the Academy of Pediatrics' good standing. And the same thing is going on here. The Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine is just a group of medical quacks. You know, it's people playing pretend when it comes to doctor. As for reality, I've got to say this. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. As a half-Dutch person, I'm really sorry. We're kind of the origin for this. As can be seen in a triage of studies, not triage, in a trio of studies done by Thomas D. Steensma, which has kind of become this talking point about desistance rates. The big study actually showed 84.2% of youth referred to gender identity clinics desisted without any further support. Now you might think, okay, that's referral, so what does it have to do with what's going on here, talking about, you know, childhood onset gender dysphoria? The problem is operationalization. You see, different cultures have different definitions and have different ways of operationalizing certain terms. Operationalizing is just a fancy way of, in science, when we do a study, we need to take an abstract concept, such as pain, and we need to quantify it. So when we talk about gender dysphoria, what are we talking about in the study? Now, someone who hears the 84.2% statistic or the 61 to 98% statistic that's sometimes thrown around, they're going to hear gender dysphoria and they're going to think, these are children who have been to see a specialist, have been diagnosed to have gender dysphoria, and have then later desisted. That's not the case. All this actually refers to are children who are referred to a gender identity clinic by, in many cases, an untrained professional. So think a parent, a teacher, a school counselor, someone who has no expertise with recognizing if a child is actually trans or not. Out of them, once they're assessed, 84.2% of said referrals receive no further support. They either are trans and the person just thinks they don't really need our support, they've got a supportive household enough, or they're not trans and they're like, yeah, it was good that you brought them here, but you know what, they don't really need us because they're not trans. That's all that actually means. That high desistance is not actual, they had gender dysphoria and they no longer have it. It is just, they were sent here by untrained professionals, we assessed them, here's how many we sent away. What's also interesting is in the second study, which was more a qualitative analysis of these case studies, the researchers found key differences between children who persisted and who did not. That's to say, children who were actually trans and were not. You know, children who were simply exploring who they were, and you know what, just send them off on their way. And they could use these differences, and this came up in the third study, which was a longitudinal one dealing with puberty blockers. because those that stayed on, a number of them went on to go on to puberty blockers when they came 12 or older. And then out of the ones that were put on puberty blockers, 100% went on to further medical transition, with I think all of them going on to HRT and then later some of them going on to surgery. Because again, not all of them will go on to, have surgery. It's a choice, and that's the important aspect here. So someone looking at that might go, well, yes, you see, that means that, puberty blockers actually cause, trans youth to, feel that they must undergo later surgery or stuff like that. And that's not the case at all. It's simply a fact that the doctors found an effective way of figuring out who is and who is not trans, so that 100% of the people they lit through were trans. That's why there's been no regret. There's not been the sudden explosion of, transition regret in the Netherlands. We've not heard about that because it's not what happened. The whole idea that, 100% of the trans youth put on puberty blockers went on to further transition, therefore, that must mean it's causing this. That is survivorship bias. That ignores the previous selection process that was involved, which dictated which children went further and which children did not. It really, when you start looking at things and actually trying to understand them beyond this bastardized understanding that people like, Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton are trying to get, what you find is a completely different picture. You do not find doctors laughing manically as they force children transition. They're actually sending away 84% of the children, literally handed to them on a silver platter. And what's more is the children that do go on to receive medical intervention in the form of puberty blockers, which are fully reversible and clinically safe, the children that do receive that, no regret. That's currently known, So, it really is interesting to see the actual reality. All three studies can be seen in the agenda. A fourth study I want to reference, because I always reference it when I talk about this point, is by comparison, a meta-analysis of US studies found that 33.7% of people who have undergone knee surgery regret it. And yet, we're not here having this big debate about, should people be able to undergo knee surgery or anything like that. We're not having that. But here we have a process by which almost everyone that goes through it, including the adults, we don't actually have any knowledge of child transition regrets yet. There's not one example in the countless people, the teenagers and young adults, there's not one example of an actual regretter among any of them. That's why, as we'll get to later, Tavistock had to get someone who transitioned as an adult, as their witness. Someone who was 21, because they couldn't find a single example that supported their case, because it doesn't exist, But it's not about the fact that, surgery regret is an issue, and we can have discussions about that and how actually we can improve things, because it turns out, when it comes to adults, I think 0.1% have regret. And that's some form of regret. And I think 90% of those that regret actually regret because of social hostility. They believed if they, medically transitioned, they'd be accepted by society. They did. They found out that society still rejects them. And what's worse is once you kind of transition medically, you can't go back into the closet. You're kind of stuck in the state. Actual regret, as I think the only example I can think of is Walt Heyer, is so incredibly rare. Out of hundreds of thousands of people who are transitioned, we have one example, and that is Walt Heyer. Again, it just, what is said in this article does not match reality. That said, next quote, continuing from Ken Paxton.
One of the few relevant studies monitored transitioned individuals from 30 years. It found high rates of post-transition suicide and significantly elevated all-cause mortality, including increased death rates from cardiovascular disease and cancer, although casualty could not be established. Causality could not be established. Casualty could not be established.
So here's, first thing first, causality could not be established. Okay, why the fuck are you bringing it up? Okay? You know, it's this kind of fear-mongering, this might be causing this, but we're going to bring it up. Why? You know, that's such a shitty thing to do. And also, this completely ignores the facts that the study did not control for exogenous variables. You know, trans people dealing with a lot of heart problems, the assumption here is the whole broken arm syndrome. Broken arm syndrome is the idea that as a trans person, if you suffer any ailment, it must be because you're trans, you know, or you're not actually trans, you know, you're just faking it, and that's causing a bunch of other conditions. The reality is, as a trans person, you receive so much hate, so much shit, and you are constantly under attack that it puts you in a constant state of anxiety. Like, to all the trans people in the chat, if you can just like say how you've been feeling recently, like, do you feel like you're constantly under attack with everything that's happening in places like Florida and Texas and in the UK with like the BBC and everything like the Tavistock, etc.? Do you feel like you're under attack a lot of the time? Because I certainly feel like I'm under attack a lot of the fucking time. And that constant stress wears down your immune system. It causes your heart to work overtime, you know. So cardiovascular issues, yeah, I can probably see how that's caused by transphobia. There's so much shit that is unaccounted for that you cannot quote this. Also, again, children are not going under irreversible procedures. That's also important. Fact is, I actually have a quote here from the article itself because, you know, you might say, okay, well, they do note that causality could not be established, but it's not like, you know, the paper actually said, don't quote us in this way. You know, Paxton isn't a science person. They're just trying to understand basic things. Okay, let me read you the actual article itself. Quote, "It is therefore important to note that the current study is only informative with respect to transsexual persons' health after sex reassignment. No inferences can be drawn as to the effectiveness of sex reassignment as a treatment for transsexualism. In other words, the results should not be interpreted such as sex reassignment per se increases morbidity and mortality. Things might have been even worse without sex reassignment. As an analogy, similar studies have found increased somatic morbidity, suicide rate, and overall mortality for patients treated for bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. This is important information, but it does not follow that mood stabilizing treatment or antipsychotic treatment is the culprit." End quote. So that is just the study straight up stating you cannot do what Ken Paxton is doing. And Ken Paxton has just gone in, you know, no, I'm going to assert my own understanding of this. And the fact is, this has led the study's author, or the study's main author, because of course there's quite a few of them, the first name reference, which is very often, there's a hierarchy involved there in academia, and that's a lot of thing, led them to state the following in an interview with the Trans Advocate. Quote, "Of course, trans medical and psychological care is efficacious. A 2010 meta-analysis confirmed by studies thereafter show that medical gender confirmation interventions reduce gender dysphoria." End quote. Efficacious, what that means, is effective. It does what it's meant to do. What is a meta-analysis, you ask? A meta-analysis is an article which isn't a single study, it is a collection of all available and relevant studies and literature to reach an informed decision. So, for fucking Ken Paxton's one reference to say, you know, it might actually cause these issues and it's not that effective, we have a meta-analysis that completely disagrees, you know, and it is just a fucking sham, you know, and it really shows the fact that the author, the main author of the study, had to come out and say this, shows just how fucking desperate the bigots are to kind of come up with any semblance of proof, you know, to kind of prove their bullshit. It's like when you get fucking Bigfoot believers and their casts, which are so clearly fake. They have no semblance of an actual anthropoid humanoid's foot at all. It's so clearly someone's gone along with a fucking rubber stamp doing it, but they present it like it's the best thing ever, you know? Except it's not even a fucking rubber stamp footprint. It's just someone fell over in the mud or something. It really is so fucking ridiculous at this point. But that's the way people like Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton operate, by lying, because it's all they can do. Okay. Next quote for Ken Paxton is just that bit.
Okay, just that.
Yeah.
Similarly, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health states that with respect to irreversible procedures, genital surgery should not be carried out until patients reach the legal age of majority to give consent for medical procedures in a given country.
Wait a second. So I'm trying to remember where the fuck this quote came from. Right, I'm guessing this is a response, but I don't remember where this exactly came from, so I should not really talk about that. First of all, here's the fucking bullshit. Again, no child is being put through genital surgery, so the relevance of this quote is irrelevant by definition. It really just to show, if the World Professional Association for Transgender Health is stating this, why are you pretending like there's an issue here when there isn't? I do have a quote here, and I do think it might have come from them, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, but I cannot state, and I don't have really the time to check it, so I think we're just going to have to leave that out for now. Okay, so yes, now read on. No, don't, Hun, please don't, Hun. No, Hun, please. Just continue with the quote, the next quote. Similarly...
1 second. Yeah. Similarly, the treatments you ask about often involve puberty-blocking medications. Such medications suppress the body's production of estrogen or testosterone to prevent puberty and are being used in this context to pause the sexual development of a person that occurs during puberty. The use of these chemical procedures for this purpose is not approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration and is considered an off-label use of the medications. These chemical procedures prevent a person's body from developing the capability to procreate. There is insufficient medical evidence available to demonstrate that discontinuing the medication resumes a normal puberty process. See generally Hennessy, Waller versus Snyder, citing Bell versus Tavistock, and Portman NHS Foundation Trust, referring to Bell's conclusion that a clinic's practice of prescribing puberty-suppressing medication to individuals under age 18 with gender dysphoria and determining such treatment was experimental. Thus, because the procedures you inquire about can and do result in sterilization, they implicate a minor child's constitutional right to procreate.
Okay, let's just get one fucking thing clear. The idea that, quote, there is insufficient medical evidence available to demonstrate that discontinuing the medication resumes a normal puberty process, end quote, is 100% unfounded bullshit. All evidence available suggests that's exactly what happens, because again, these medications were designed for cis children of an earlier age, so even earlier than what we're talking about trans youth, talking about teenagers when it comes to trans youth, and yet they work absolutely fine. And we have seen no adverse effects for youth who have come off them in regards to transitioning, so that just does not stand up to scrutiny. That is just a flat-out lie. And it's interesting how they attempt to bury this lie. They don't quote the Bell v. Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust directly. They quote Hennessy, Waller, and Snyder. And the reason for that, as you probably know if you're on this channel, is the fact that the Tavistock ruling was overruled. it was found to be completely void of any fucking evidence, science, anything backing it up. Because it was just an absolute sham. For those that don't know, I do have a video on Tavistock. You can find that in the agenda, linked in the description down below. However, to give you a quick run over, so pretty much, transphobes in the UK are forwarding the same argument. They're trying to attack, trans youth, etc. They're arguing that trans youth, they're arguing that trans boys are in fact lost lesbians who are being transitioned, are being indoctrinated and transitioned. They're being sterilized, they're having their breasts cut off, even though they haven't actually developed breasts under puberty blockers and all that. That's where the whole up and down the UK quote I mentioned earlier came from. So they've gone on this attack, and in order to help them in this, they took the main provider for trans healthcare, or trans youth healthcare in the UK, to court over this. When I say UK, I mean England and Wales. I should be more specific, I do apologise. Anyway, so they took him to court, and you might think, okay, so they must have had a claimant on their team. Well, they had a couple of claimants, but they were fucking irrelevant. One, of course, was Belle. She is someone who transitioned. I believe she started puberty blockers when she was 16, went on to HRT when she was 18. Should be noted, the full age of legal medical consent in the UK is 16. So again, only started HRT when she reached 18, and then I believe she had a double mastectomy when she was 21. Complete adult. Okay, so what the fuck is she doing relating to trans youth? She has no relevance here, but that's all they had. The second claimant was the mother of a trans child who was currently waiting for their first appointment with Tavistock, and the average waiting list at Tavistock is, I think, 3 years. And I believe the child was 14, so by the time they actually saw Tavistock for their first appointment, and then they've got to have several more appointments before they even begin thinking about, puberty blockers or anything else, they'd be an adult, medically, in the UK. Nobody, the child hadn't even stepped over the fucking boundary into the bloody building, but the mother was like, oh my god, what if they, indoctrinate my child? And it was such a fucking mess. The court that was presiding over the original case just flat out believed any lie they were sold by the transphobic crowd. Again, many of the same lies that we're seeing in this letter. And a later review found that nothing they had actually, gone over, stood up. They'd actually concluded that Tavistock had acted within its remit, but at the same time they ruled that they had somehow violated their remit. It was a complete mess, a complete farce. It was all overturned, and it's being referenced here.
Just wanted to say that the missing quotes are actually by them.
Okay, so yes, okay. So it was the author again. I do apologise for that. I see Adia has added a correction. Thank you for doing that. But yeah, so, again, they are referencing a now overturned ruling in the Supreme Court of England and Wales, which again shows how desperate it is. But it shows, as people mentioned at the very start of the stream, the kind of international implications this entire thing can have, where even if something is overturned, it can still have an impact, even overseas. Because we are just seeing how this Belle v. Tavistock is being cited in places like Australia, and it's being cited in places like the US, and it's like, I'm really fucking sorry. And at the same time, as we'll come to later with Jeff Younger, that's also my fear with... That's also my fear with Jeff Younger, and how his narrative is becoming international. It's really just an absolute fucking mess, and it's kind of terrifying how interconnected everything is. As for the idea of, this is off-label, a lot of medications are given off-label. One of the simplest examples of off-label is the way in which hormonal birth control can be given to anyone to stop acne or cramps. If a person has a womb and they're cramping a lot, hormonal birth control can very often help that. That's not the actual use, but that's what it's used for. It's also important I say it's important to note that hormonal birth control does have some minor side effects as well, But yeah, like I think Texas Republicans would also be happy to get rid of that. So it's not exactly the best argument for them. But if someone's running around claiming to be a feminist, that is always a good argument to reach for. But yeah, it's just like these medications are known to be safe for minors. It helps alleviate, feelings of suicidality in trans youth. Therefore, use it. Because as much as the bullshit about like fertility is, here's a fun fact: dead children can't breed. Dead children can't do a lot of things, in fact, because they're fucking dead. It always gets me that, oh my god, fertility, it's like the worst thing ever. Like loss of fertility is like the worst thing ever. And I get that, yes, it can be a tragic thing for many people. Many people do like see a part of central life as having children. I don't quite understand it, but for many people that is a thing. But death is so much more severe. Saving lives is the most important thing, and respecting bodily autonomy as well. Preserving that bodily autonomy is also an important aspect. It's also worth noting that, like, even if it's off-label, there's decades of evidence with these medications being used with, children who have gone through early onset puberty, but that's just ignored, of course. Next quote, which again comes from Ken Paxton.
Under Texas law, a minor is a person under 18 years of age that has never been married and never declared an adult by a court, including a minor on active duty in the military, one who does not live with a parent or guardian, and who manages their own financial affairs, among others.
And this I just want to get at the quote, including a minor on active duty in the military, end quote. So let me get this right. Paxton, according to Paxton, Greg Abbott and all his fucking lot, children, minors, are allowed to sign up to the military and be shot at and blown up and psychologically scarred and carry out inexcusable war crimes in the name of fucking, the military-industrial state, all that. But they're not allowed basic bodily fucking autonomy. You expect, you trust them to pick up a gun and point it and know when to shoot and when not to shoot, but you don't trust them with their own body. It really, like, we've talked about like voting rights and all this, and how like the age of voting in many places is lower than the age of active military. You can apply to be in the military, and it always just gets me how fucking dystopian it is. But here it is, like, you're allowed to take someone else's life before you're allowed to take control of your own life and make it better. That's just heinous. That's just, what do you even say about that? Next quote, I think it's a long one. I'm really sorry, it's a long one. Sadly, I couldn't break this one apart because it covers a lot. Ken Paxton again.
Regarding parental consent, Texas law generally recognizes a parent's right to consent to a child's medical care. A parent of a child has the following rights and duties. Number 6, the right to consent to the child's medical and dental care and psychiatric, psychological and surgical treatment. But this general right to consent to certain medically necessary procedures does not extend to elective, in brackets, not medically necessary, procedures and treatments that infringe upon a minor child's constitutional right to procreate. Indeed, courts have analyzed the imposition of unnecessary medical procedures upon children in similar circumstances in the past to determine whether doing so constitutes child abuse. One such situation that the law has addressed is often referred to as Munchausen by proxy, or factitious disorder imposed on another. Psychological disorder that is characterized by the intentional feigning, exaggeration, or induction of the symptom of a disease or injury in oneself or another, and that is accompanied by the seeking of excessive medical care from various doctors and medical facilities typically resulting in multiple diagnostic tests, treatments, procedures, and hospitalizations. Unlike the malingerer, unlike the malingerer who consciously induces symptoms to obtain something of value, the patient with a factitious, is it factitious or fictitious?
Factitious, it is factitious.
Okay. The patient with a factitious disorder consciously produces symptoms of unconscious reasons without identifiable gain. 1 second. So back to the letter. In situations such as this, an individual intentionally seeks to procure, often by deceptive means such as exaggeration, unnecessary medical procedures or treatments either for themselves or others, usually their children. In Texas, courts have found that these Munchausen by proxy situations can constitute child abuse. In the context of elective sex change procedures for minors, the legislature has not provided any avenue for parental consent, and no judicial avenue exists for the child to proceed with these procedures and treatments without parental consent. By comparison, Texas law respecting abortion requires parental consent and in extenuating circumstances permits non-parental consent for a minor to obtain an abortion, requiring written consent of a child's parent before a physician may perform an abortion on an unemancipated minor. Authorizing judicial approval of a minor's abortion without parental consent is limited in limited circumstances. But the Texas legislature has not decided to make those same allowances for consent to sterilization, and thus a parent cannot consent to sterilization procedures or treatments that result in the permanent deprivation of a minor child's constitutional right to procreate. Thus, no avenue exists for a child to consent to and obtain consent for an elective procedure or treatment that causes sterilization.
Important thing to point out, as Robert has noted here, remember elective means won't avoid immediate morbidity or mortality. Most cancer surgery, elective. So that's something to keep in mind here. Anyway, thank you, Hispanic, no problem. I've just been noting that I should really be giving more people moderator privileges who have been around for a very long time, so I've just been doing that. I do that in a second. But yes, and I've just got one unpack here, and that is just Jeff Damon Younger. If you've been with the channel recently, you've probably seen my Jeff Damon Younger video, and you know exactly what I'm going to talk about here, because Jeff Damon Younger is a Texan man. He is an abusive piece of shit who has been terrorizing his ex-wife and his children. And of course that includes his trans daughter, Luna Damon Younger. Luna is a trans child who was first noticed to possibly be transgender by her mother, Dr. Ann Georgelis, who is a pediatrician, who immediately took her daughter to go and see a specialist child psychiatrist in the same building that she worked at. That psychiatrist, after I think it was a good year of consultation, came to the conclusion that yes, Luna is trans, and we should possibly think about how you can support her and all that. Mr. Younger got very angry at this and was like, no, I need a second opinion and all this. And Dr. Georgelis, who at the time had full medical custody of Luna and thus did not require to do anything at his demand, decided to do it anyway. She went out and she got a second opinion by a psychiatrist who did not know her prior, and it's also worth mentioning before a bunch of people start claiming that, it's SJW therapist. The therapist was married to a pastor. They're very Christian, very Texan sort of thing. And she also, I think it was Dr. Pape, if I remember correctly, Dr. Pape also reached the conclusion that, yes, Luna was trans, and referred her to a gender specialist clinic in Texas. Now, the gender specialist clinic in Texas was okay, we've had a referral, but the referral's not by a specialist in this specific field, so you know what? We need to get another independent diagnosis, this time by an LGBT plus counselor, and it was, I'm trying to remember I do not remember the counsellor's name, I do apologise, but if you watch the video, you will find the counsellor's name. The counsellor assessed Luna, and the third assessment found that she was still trans. Of course, Mr. Younger famously then went to public, started lying about his ex-wife. He started claiming that like they were hostile, they were not allowing a second opinion when Luna had seen 3 specialists by this point. He also attempted to weaponize Child Protective Services, which we kind of see echoed in what Greg Abbott is doing here, calling the police to a children's night at the school, turning up with a bunch of his friends, all with cameras like rolling to try and capture the moment that Dr. Georgilus was taken away in a squad car so he could blast it on the internet, you know, I was right, I've been vindicated, she's a terrible woman and she's trying to, like, trans my daughter. You wouldn't say daughter, of course, but fuck him. That didn't happen. Thankfully, Dr. Georgilus is a upper class, like, white woman. She is one of the people least likely to be on the receiving end of police violence, and in this instance, Child Protective Services began investigating Jeff Younger, and it was discovered that whilst Luna always had the choice of which way she presented and which way she was referred to at Dr. Georgilus, the same was not true at Mr. Younger's. He had no clothes, he lied about that fact to Child Protective Services, you know, and he just refused to allow her to dress how she wants and be referred to how she wants. Jeff has noted himself, and I'll actually be doing all of this in a future video, that he has political connections. I have no fucking doubt that one of those is Greg Abbott. He has political connections. He's been going to Republican conferences and eating and dining with like these people, trying to get them onto his crusade. Recently, he's gone on to actually start running for office in Texas House District 63. Again, check the Jeff Damon Younger video that I've got linked in the agenda. You know, check that out. Once you check it out, if you can get involved. Like, we need to observe this. If he does become the Republican candidate, we need to get him taken out, because if he becomes it, it's going to sort of normalize his narrative. One of those narratives, because there's largely 2 claims made by him as to why his wife is doing this. One is apparently this deep emotional maternal need for daughters, which has Jeff ignore the facts that Dr. Georgilus already has 2 daughters. So that's gone. The other is Munchausen's by proxy. And specifically, this is a narrative that has been helped promoted by Dr. Michelle Cretella, I should say. She is the head of the American College of Pediatricians, which I mentioned earlier, the fake pediatric institution of just like 400 members. For comparison, the Academy of Pediatrics has 67,000 members. So yeah, and sadly that is the narrative that has been presented, and so I think it's no surprise that it's come up here. What's interesting to point out is the fact that Munchausen's by proxy is an issue that can impact any sort of diagnosis, and yet it's only applied the assumption that Munchausen by proxy must be involved is only ever applied to trans people, you know, or specifically in cases of trans youth. Of course, Munchausen by proxy is a very real issue. We have systems in place to figure out when it's occurring and to tackle it. Those already exist in Texas. That is already a thing in Texas. You know, Greg Abbott is not talking about rolling out new forms of assessment to figure out if Munchausen by proxy in general is an issue in Texas. He is effectively trying to force this link that says any trans youth is a victim of Munchausen's by proxy. That is what's effectively going on here. It's essentializing Munchausen's by proxy as an intrinsic part of the trans youth equation, which is sadly a narrative many people will be running. They've been running with it for a long time, but it's going to get a hell of a lot worse now that Ken Paxton, along with Greg Abbott, is just repeating this it's a buzzword. You know, it sounds technical, it does actually have a use, but they're just using it in such a foul way that kind of removes its usefulness. So yes, definitely worth checking out the Deaf Damon Younger video. I'm currently doing a follow-up because Mr. Younger has actually gone on record stating that if he does not get his way, Texas citizens can expect to be assaulted by his supporters. He's even stated that there's likely to be judicial assassinations. So again, a genuinely terrifying man, and it just shows the mindset of the people that Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton are reaching out to. It's also why when I tell you to, if you want to get involved with the protests going on at Greg Abbott's mansion, coming up, do play it safe. If we could have leftists with arms turn up just in case some right-wing people try to escalate things, play it safe. Do be aware that these people have been radicalizing themselves with some extremely horrific ideas, such as the idea that this is all the result of a Jewish shadow state. Again, you see the way that they talk about preserving, white girls, actually, trans boys, and they offer they're stealing our women, that whole narrative. So be very careful with these far right, Republican thoughts. They are very dangerous, and they are probably going to be armed, knowing Texas. Anyway, do you want to continue with the next quote from Ken Paxton?
Further, the legislature has explicitly defined female genital mutilation and made such act a state jail felony. Felony. While the legislature has not elsewhere defined the phrase genital mutilation, nor specifically for males of any age, 19 of the legislature's criminalization of a particular type of genital mutilation supports an argument that analogous procedures that include genital mutilation, potentially including gender reassignment surgeries, could constitute abuse under the Family Code's broad and non-exhaustive examples of child abuse or neglect. See Generally Commissioner's letter at 1, concluding that genital mutilation may cause a genuine threat of substantial harm from physical injury to the child. Thus, many of the procedures and treatments you ask about can constitute female genital mutilation, a standalone criminal act. But even where these procedures and treatments may not constitute female genital mutilation under Texas law, a court could still find that these procedures and treatments constitute child abuse under Section 261.001 of the Family Code.
We have just received a $5 donation from Donna. You're number one. Thank you. It's lovely. Thank you for your donation. It's really helpful. I just do my... Oh, God. I was doing so well. I just always like to bring it back up as well when I talk about it. So again, thank you very much for that. Okay. So we're just going through all of the stages here, and now we've gone past genocide, we've gone past Munchausen by proxy. We're now comparing it to female genital mutilation, which is an absolutely horrific thing. It's of course worth noting why FGM occurs. It's not just done because someone goes, oh, FGM is this fancy thing, let's do this thing. No, FGM at its core comes down to this idea of purity and preserving purity, preserving the sexual viability of young girls. The exact thing Greg Abbott keeps going fucking on about, along with Ken Paxton, of course. So I should say more Ken Paxton, but Greg Abbott signed off on this letter, so if I say Greg Abbott, Ken Paxton, whichever one, they both sign off on each other, okay? The very thing that they're actually fucking doing right here. And again, there's this absolute heinous thing of comparing adults going through, gender surgery versus minors being forced and traumatized and going through it. We see the way that it's completely ignored, how intersex genital mutilation is literally, Ken Paxton is attempting to justify IGM in this fucking video. I've had someone point out the fact that, of course, circumcision is a very common practice in, Texas, and whilst we're not necessarily, whilst we're not saying that, circumcision is on the same level as both FGM and IGM, both of which carry with them far, more severe consequences, it is still a violation of the infant's bodily autonomy, no medical benefit, causes loss in sensation and so many other conditions. And just the fact that you've been violated in that way, it's still a heinous fucking thing to go through. And yet, here, fucking Paxton thinks he's got an argument in the fact that adults are allowed to undergo genital surgery. Again, no minors are. That's completely off the table. That is just a boogeyman that they've invented. I don't know if you've got anything specifically that you'd like to remark on this.
Nothing really, because honestly, it's not a thing that happens in my community.
Okay.
The only community in India that I can think of where this happens are Bohra Muslims, who are a specific group of Shia Muslims, I think.
Okay.
So
but I wasn't sure because like your work in the past and everything. So.
Yes. There have been. When you look into the works, and
I wasn't asking about cultural thing. It was just because your work in feminist circles. That's,
yeah,
that's why I was asking.
It is a bodily violation, and the thing is, it's not even religiously mandated. So, it's generally done to make girls sexually cool in the name of submitting yourself to God. So,
of course, there's a big difference here between adults like choosing to do what you're saying and like not. And it's like, when it comes to also, one last note, because I will just mention circumcision, I should note that I think Abraham was 80 when he got circumcised, so like you can have your covenant at a later date, that's not an issue. Yeah. Anyway, moving on to the next quote.
Even where the procedure or treatment does not involve the physical removal or alteration of a child's reproductive organs, that is puberty blockers, these procedures and treatments can cause mental or emotional injury to a child that results in an observable and material impairment in the child's growth, development, or psychological functioning by subjecting a child to the mental and emotional injury associated with lifelong sterilization and impairment to one's growth and development.
Again, this is just complete citation needed. There's just absolutely no basis for this whatsoever. They don't give any relevant citation for it, so like it's not a case I'm just leaving things out. The quote they give, of course, is the child abuse definitions earlier. So it's just like, again, they have no defense for this, so they're just taking their bullshit and they are running with it. Nothing's stopping them. Okay, this is the... Just having a quick... Yeah, this is the last and final one. This is the last quote for the actual Paxton letter, so, yeah.
It is important to note that anyone who has a reasonable cause to believe that a child's physical or mental health or welfare has been adversely affected by abuse or neglect by any person shall immediately make a report as described in the Family Code. Further, if a professional has reasonable cause to believe that a child has been abused or neglected or may be abused or neglected, or that a child is a victim of an offence under Section 21.11 of the Penal Code, and the professional has reasonable cause to believe that the child has been abused as defined by Section 261.001, the professional shall make a report not later than the 48th hour after the hour the professional first has reasonable cause to believe that the child has been or may be abused or neglected or is a victim of an offence under Section 21.11 Penal Code. The term includes teachers, nurses, doctors, daycare employees, employees of a clinic or healthcare facility that provides reproductive services, juvenile probation officers, and juvenile detention or correctional officers. Also, a failure to report under these circumstances is a criminal offence.
And this is where the real terror comes in. Not so much with the fact that, hey, this is not technically legal, it's not gone to court yet, but it's this idea of like citizens policing of public.
It's called mandatory reporting.
Well, no, that's not what I'm on about. Because, like, it's not actually legal. They don't actually legally have to do this. What I'm on about is the fact that in the same way that when bathroom bills, even if they hadn't been passed yet, even if they weren't in law, even if they got cut down, citizens were just randomly assigning themselves the job of, like, if they saw someone who was gender non-conforming, or they didn't quite, they looked kind of squinty, like, is that person, trans or not? If they went after them, and, like, they assigned themselves the bathroom police, pretty much. It's the same sort of thing here. It's calling on for them, even if this hasn't been entered. There are people out there who are going to feel empowered now. Like, they're going to think, oh, well, I guess this means I can report that, like, couple down the street that I've always fucking hated how they've, like, raised their child. And because even if, like, Child Protective Services finds nothing, just, like, the process of being investigated can be traumatic. And yes, I understand the, benefits of being investigated when a child is actually, being abused outweighs, like, the discomfort that when someone isn't. But when it's like you're being targeted, you're being ordered to target someone because of a part of their family has a certain protected characteristic, that is just horrific. It really is, and it's absolutely terrifying prospect. And I can absolutely understand that even though this isn't law, the sense of citizen policing is still going to cause a lot of damage and a lot of terror. It's just, it really is. Using government agencies to enforce executive order is to take trans kids is tantamount to making a law. Not exactly. We'll come to that later. Like, we'll come to this later. But anyway. First thing is from the American Civil Liberties Union, which responded to Abbott and Paxton. If you could just read this out quickly.
Attorney General Paxton's opinion and General Abbott's late... Kill me. Why did I... I'm sorry. I will begin again. Attorney General Paxton's opinion and Governor Abbott's letter have no legal effect, can't change Texas law, and can't override the constitutional rights of Texas families. No court anywhere in the country has ever found that gender-affirming care can be considered child abuse. Although these materials are not legally binding, they spread fear and misinformation and could spur false reporting of child abuse at a time when trans youth continue to be threatened by state leadership as part of a politically motivated misinformation campaign. Texas isn't alone. Dozens of states have proposed banning medical care for trans youth, including criminalizing access to this care. There is a nationwide crisis of politicians using their power to attack trans kids, and we will use the full firepower of the ACLU to fight back.
So again, it's not legal, but again, even the ACLU has to admit there's a lot of damage that can be done here. The way this is going to happen is eventually someone somewhere is going to be taken to court over this. And when that happens, that is going to set legal precedent. And that would have a ripple effect probably throughout other states and then maybe even the rest of the world. But it is really this, like, it's currently in the way of being set. We also have a rather long quote from the National Association of Social Workers. I'm sorry, this is the last quote, and then you're free. You're free.
I'm free to eat my potatoes.
You're free to eat your potatoes.
Aludam. Okay. National Association of Social Workers. The National Association of Social Workers Texas chapter, in brackets NASW Texas, stands opposed to any efforts to change the definition of child abuse to include gender-affirming care as referenced in the Texas Attorney General's non-binding opinion KP 0401, released on February 18, 2022, as well as Governor Abbott's February 22, 2022 letter to the Department of Family and Protective Services, that is the DFPS Commissioner, directing DFPS to investigate such accusations. These continued attempts to change the definition of child abuse are in direct opposition to social work values principles and our code of ethics and pose danger to transgender youth and their families. NASW Texas reminds licensed social workers that this is a non-binding legal opinion and they still have professional discretion on mandatory reporting. No rules on reporting were changed through this opinion, nor through the governor's letter. As mental health professionals working in a variety of settings, social workers are called to care for all Texans. Redefining child abuse to include gender-affirming care would endanger how mental health professionals serve people in the LGBTQ community. The Social Work Code of Ethics provides a framework for how social workers empower and support the self-determination of all people, as well as engage in conversations about identity. Those conversations within a therapeutic or any social work relationship should never be defined as child abuse. This position aligns with our previous advocacy actions regarding this policy issue. We signed onto a joint letter supporting gender-affirming care as evidence-based care for transgender youth in November 2019. We publicly testified against legislation that would have redefined child abuse to include gender-affirming care during the 87th legislative session in 2021. We submitted multiple joint letters to DFPS and the Governor's Office during August 2021 in response to this issue. NASW Texas continues to urge Texas leadership to heed the advice of the legal, medical, and mental health professional communities about how these proposed actions would endanger youth and families while negatively impacting the licensed professionals who serve as mandatory reports of child abuse. This non-binding legal opinion does not require DFPS to implement modifications to its current practices and rules which guide the investigation of reports of child abuse and neglect in Texas. We therefore ask the DFPS leadership team to stand in support of all Texas children and families by rejecting this harmful and discriminatory opinion.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.
I love you.
I love you too. For those who don't know, I've actually been suffering the flu for the past week, and my voice was going yesterday, so it's like I was a bit worried that I'd get towards the end of this, like halfway to like 3/4 through the stream, and realize my voice is going. So that's why Adita offered to come and help me.
How could you even think of doing this on your own?
I don't know. But anyway, there's a few things to unpack here. One of which is the fact that Greg Abbott knows he's wrong. He's being corrected by professionals of the field, personally, and he's decided to go ahead and make an ass out of himself anyway. It's also important to note the fact that the NASW Texas agrees with the ACLU. This is not legally binding. DFPS doesn't have to do anything specifically now. And it also calls on social workers to ignore the governor's demands. And it's important to point out how big institutions like these are picking up the fight. They are standing with trans people. So trans people, if you're watching this, if you're afraid about what's happening, you're not alone. There are people fighting your fight. Doesn't mean we can come to overly rely on them, but they are there. I just want to do a couple of additional comments. I'll do the actual why after. It's important to note that Houston and Austin have stated that they simply won't prosecute. The issue here is the fact that the DFPS, of course, is a state-run thing, so it's beholden to the governor. So if this continues to go through, it might reach a point where, yes, they do have to do this, at which point it's going to become, will these specific locations and judges and all that, will they prosecute? And both Houston and Austin state they won't. I'm not actually sure that is a good idea, and this is my thinking why. If all of the places in Texas which are more likely to be trans inclusive just refuse to engage with DFPS, what might end up happening, and this is from as much as I understand the American legal system, is you might end up with a far more hostile judge in a far more hostile area setting that precedent. That's the one fear I have about that. I'm not sure if it would be actually better for a place like Austin or Houston to actually rush through a case and just like eviscerate the idea completely. But you know, that's always playing with fire. Also, I just want to note one fact, and that's I know I've said it a few times. I've like said Texas people, you know, our Texas people. It's like I keep having to correct myself to say Texas Republicans. There has been a kind of idea to sort of write off the people of Texas, and that's a narrative we've got to avoid. You know, it's very important just to do things, and like people in Texas, many of them are absolutely wonderful people. Gerrymandering in Texas is absolutely horrific. If you don't know what the practice of gerrymandering is, I don't have time to really get into like the detail of it, but pretty much the areas for like who's elected are set up in such a way that like you concentrate as much of the opposition in a few select places, and then you water them down over the majority of the actual electorate, creating some really strange district borders and all this. In order to effectively ensure that the Republican Party wins no matter what. No matter what portion of the state is actually like left, like I say left wing, Democrat, like the Republicans will always win. So, you know, you can't just blame the people of Texas for this. Like, this is what they've been born into. They've put up opposition in the past, you know, they have fought this in the past, and they have stood up for us in the past. So, like, people of Texas are not evil. Texas Republicans, like, they're the ones who we really need to fucking scrutinize the hell out of. So yes, I just want to apologize if I've ever stated throughout the show Texan, and I've not corrected myself. Do understand that, like, there is a kind of programming involved when it comes to, like, how people generally see the southern states. Yeah. But if there's anything that the Black Lives Matter movement showed us in the last couple of years, it's the fact that there isn't that stark divide. You know, it was Democratic mayors who were sometimes being the most violent towards Black Lives Matter protesters. So, yeah, I just wanted to make that clear as well. I just want to go over like a few reasons as to why Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton might be doing this. The first is, as mentioned previously, last year Texas Republicans failed to pass a bill on trans healthcare, effectively like criminalizing it, making it illegal. And there seems to be like a lashing out involving that, and to me that definitely improves the intent to harm, which is encompassed in the UN definition of genocide. It shows that, hey, this is not just a once-off and they're like doing one thing. They are constantly attacking trans people at every fucking level they can. There's also these sporting bans and all that, which leads me rather nicely onto my next point, and that is feeding the trans hysteria. If you don't know what trans hysteria is, it's a model that I've kind of created by stealing from homo hysteria, which is Eric Anderson's model. Pretty much it explains how society goes through these different stages where there is, in the original model, homo erasure, homo hysteria, and then acceptance. Now, what are these models? Well, homo erasure occurs when like hostility towards homosexual people is high, but they're kind of like a rare phenomenon. They're kind of seen like a monster, you know, they don't happen that often. Homo hysteria occurs when the hostility is still there and actually increases in many cases, but the knowledge about the community also increases. With gay people, we saw this in the post-Second World War era, we saw it around the AIDS crisis, you know, these sorts of events that happened, because when you get that junction of high hostility and high awareness, that creates the hysteria. That creates when like all these bills start coming out, the attacks start coming out, the violence increases, hate crime actually goes up from what it was previously. You know, people were actually going on witch hunts looking for marginalized people. And then as like the marginalized identity becomes normalized, homosexuality becomes normalized, the awareness stays up there, but the aggression decreases, and that leads you into acceptance. Trans hysteria as a model takes the exact same thing. You know, trans people have in the media for the longest time been mocked, ridiculed, presented as predatory. Ace Ventura, The movie changed one of its characters into a trans man to make him out.
Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs, you know, all this sort of thing. Like, they've been, I think maligned is the right word, isn't it? Maligned. They've been maligned.
Misrepresented.
You know, presented as these horrible people. But
maliciously represented.
But and I have to use this terminology, they were viewed as a freak show, you know, a circus attraction, the bearded lady, if you will. They were a rare thing. Like, you heard about it in gossip mags, like, every couple of years, one star maybe. Then we hit the trans tipping point. You know, Laverne Cox. I've actually forgotten the name of the horrible Republican trans woman, so Caitlyn Jenner. Now I remember. Caitlyn Jenner, all of this comes out. Immediately hit out into the... the bathroom panic, and that's when we hit, again, increasing awareness, hostility is still up there, and that's it. That's the trans hysteria, that's when that kicks in. We have not achieved the acceptance stage yet. Things are still going up, etc. And the thing is, when it comes to things like the hysteria, there's no logic or reasoning to it. There's no separation. The framing of the trans community as predatory and abusive in any situation will frame them as abusive and predatory in all situations. Excuse me. The word I use to describe it is the reservoir of transphobia. Now, what's interesting is the fact that we actually kind of had the bathroom scare under wraps in the US. Yes, there was an explosive period. There were a couple of really horrible bills passed, a couple of actual positive bills being struck down, but largely we beat them on that. This whole thing has been noted by people on the ground in the US and Texas specifically to have direct links to the resurgence that was brought about by the trans hysteria regarding trans people in sports. So not even trans youth specifically, but trans people in sports, the trans hysteria surrounding that in 2019, which again kicked off and became worldwide news. The narrative that trans women are a danger to women's sports became trans people are a danger to women's sports, became trans people are a danger.
All the time invisibilizing trans men in sports.
Yes. But that whole trans people are a danger, like, that doesn't vanish, you know, that doesn't go away, even though the Olympics has just come out and said, you know, we were wrong, trans people deserve to be included, respected, everything else. Hello, train, fuck off. In spite of all that, you know, it doesn't disappear. It's waiting there, under our feet the entire fucking time, this reservoir of fucking transphobia. So when people like Greg Abbott also start coming out and now start attacking trans youth, they can tap directly into it, and it is universal. And I bring this up because I've noticed that a couple of people that were involved in supporting the trans hysteria regarding sports, like Jimmy Snow, Shannon Q, you know, of course we've got Ashanati Rules, Holy Kool-Aid, Rachel Oates, I've forgotten his name. I've forgotten, so it's the Skeptics, so many of these people. Not all of them, but a couple of them, like Jimmy Snow and Shannon Q, have like started like talking, you know, how terrible what is happening in Texas is right now. And it's like, yeah, and you had a hand in it. You helped make this. Our blood is on your hands, you know, and I don't want to let these people ever forget that fucking fact. And what Greg is doing here, and Paxton is doing here, Ken Paxton is doing here, what they're doing here is they're feeding that reservoir. They're taking from it, and they're putting straight back into it. And it's also another thing that's happening here is they're forming a narrative of irreversible procedures in people's minds before this reaches the courts. And the reason they're doing that, what I've come up with, is the fact that they're kind of manufacturing this consent. By putting the narrative on, they are medically transitioning trans youth, which they're not. Most they do is like medically pause trans youth, and that's teenagers, not children. So that's the nuance that's always lost when they talk about trans youth. By doing that, that's where they frame the conversation. And so when people hear about this in regards to the courts, maybe weeks, months, or even a few years from now, they remember it as, oh yeah, that those trans people are forcing like little children to get genital surgery and stuff like that. That's what they're doing. They're forming that narrative in people's mind in order to manufacture this consent, and thus laying the ground for future policy. The last reason I think they're doing this is largely to put trans people in their place. There's this whole idea of, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, it's kind of like this notion of catcalling, almost. Catcalling, of course, is a heinous practice that is used by men in patriarchy that kind of like targets women as they just are about in their daily lives, targets, sexualizes them, and lets them know that they're being sexualized to say, you exist at our pleasure, you exist as like our like viewage and voyeurism and all that. This is kind of the same thing, but for marginalized people, specifically trans people. You only exist at our discretion, and we're coming for you, and it puts them in that constant state of terror, tension, and everything else. So yes, and those are the largely reasons I think they're doing all this. So what can we do? Well, there's a couple of things we can do. Basic one is, of course, there's a protest going on. This is going to allow me to post. Nope. Okay, one second. I'm just trying to get this. We have a protest going on the 14th of March. Trans Kids Cry for Help. This will be taking place at the Texas Governor's Mansion. If you can just... what are you doing? No,
there's an easier way to share this.
I've already shared. It's already shared. Okay. So I've put a link in the description. If you can check that out. If those of you who can make it, please, check that out. Turn up, be safe. Like, I wouldn't take your kids if you got kids because, again, the far right has been threatening violence for a very long time on this topic. So do be safe, be prepared. Just do whatever you can. Another thing is I should probably mention that event's been organized by the Trans Resistance of Texas. You can also donate to various local trans groups, and I have just posted a link to a Twitter feed, Twitter thread posted by Heron Greensmith. Go through that, find organizations. Don't just donate to organizations near the top. Some of you, it'd be good if you scroll down to the bottom, think about donating to organizations towards the bottom, especially if you're cis. I'm just going to say, if you're cis, without the wallet. If you're trans, like, do what you can, but I understand as well that we're living through this. This is what we're going through. Other things, of course, is the fact that you can, like, help people, like, figure out things. Sadly, I realize that I'm not the most popular in certain circles for various reasons. So I've got a few other articles that you can listen to, get other opinions from, or send to other people. The first link is by Dr. Ada Rhodes, who did an interview with an American lawyer, Alejandra Caraballo. Thank you. Of course, the next link I'm just going to share is my previous video with Jeff Younger. So that is definitely worth the watch. That will give you more information. Again, he is running for the Republican seat in House District 63. I'll also go ahead and link the recent stream by Sophie from Mars. So yes, that's also worth checking out. If you want to share, but you don't want to share my work, because again, I know how people perceive me, especially people not inside the trans community. There are these other options that you can share with people to kind of soft nudge them into like, hey, take a look at this, please. Because I kind of understand my own limitations.